Thanks, Count Corla. Taoiseach, I have to say your responses to the previous deputies really only reveal what a fantasy world you live in, and one which has no bearing on the real lives of ordinary citizens. Do you not think it is an indictment of your government that the Grey Army have had to again take to the streets on this wet and miserable day, not to enrich themselves, not for their own personal gain, but in order to defend the idea of society's social wage, the rights and entitlements built up over decades that make the difference between a decent civilization and absolute poverty, rights and entitlements which your government have consistently stripped away, not because it's necessary, not because you don't have another choice, but because of your relentless pursuit of the ideas of neoliberalism. And I have to say, I don't think the pensioners are going to be alone, because they will probably be joined on Thursday by another section of society, this time Dublin Bus workers, who face their fourth ballot on the so-called new restructuring plan, which obviously isn't new at all, it's just a rehash of the previous three. And dress it up any way you like, what's been proposed for these workers is to take over €6 million out of their pay packets as part of a rationalisation package of over 12 million, erode jobs and conditions and bring in a race to the bottom. And just in case they might have the neck to reject that package again, you focus their attention. Your ministers come out and tell them there'll be very stark consequences if they vote no. Reminiscent of William Martin Murphy, these people are told, vote for this or else. Capitulate or the alternative will be worse. And of course they are aided in this by the media chorus of telling them why can't and what's wrong with Dublin Bus workers when everybody else accepts being bled dry. Well, I think, Taoiseach, that not everybody else does accept being bled dry. The ASTI members don't accept it, the junior doctors don't accept it, and the tens of thousands of other workers who voted against the recent pay deals don't accept it either. And at the heart of this discussion, really, as with the protest today, is what type of society do we want to live in, and what will be your legacy? Because you see, public services cost money. And it's not really good enough for you to expect workers to pay for that out of their wage packets, because you're not prepared to invest and subsidise properly a decent transport system in this state. And the reason why you aren't isn't that you don't have the money, it's that you're too busy subsidising the wealthy. And I have to say, like many citizens, I thought you had some neck yesterday to give your address to the nation and talk about a welfare dependency culture, a code for an onslaught on poor and vulnerable people. Nothing about the dependency culture of the parasites who got us into this mess in the first place, the people you've no problem bailing out and subsidising. Instead, you'd prefer to go to low-paid bus workers or pensioners and ask them to pay up instead. So my question to you, Taoiseach, is when are you going to end this economic and social lunacy and start investing in public transport and public services, and stop expecting workers to pay for this through an erosion of wages and conditions, just stripping these companies bare and facilitating a privatisation for the wealthy interests that you so clearly represent?
Well, in your speech, you covered a lot of ground in the speech, Deputy Daly. As I said in response to Deputy Adams, the budget included 100 million more to maintain pensions for the elderly at a very high rate, much higher than many other countries in Europe. I made the point that the state pension, the carer scheme, the free travel, the free television licences have not been touched. The free fuel allowance hasn't been touched, because that's important. The tax treatment of the elderly remains unchanged, with no net change in net income for pensioners under this particular budget. Those who are aged over 65 will continue to have more favourable tax treatment than any other taxpayers in the country. That favourable treatment has been protected in the budget. The preferential treatment for elderly under the universal social card remains with a person over 70 or over. They're not liable to the highest rates of USC if their income doesn't exceed 60,000. The USC does not apply to social welfare payments, including the state pension payments of a similar nature made by other state or any other territory. And furthermore, such payments, Deputy Daly, will not be taken into account in determining if an individual has exceeded the 60,000 threshold. These are all protectionist measures, if you like, and facilities, because we recognise the importance of the contribution made by elderly people over the years. Those aged 66 and over, as you're aware, are not liable to pay PRSI on any of their income, including their unearned income, and in comparison to an average worker on 33,000 per annum, faces a marginal tax rate of 52%, including income tax, universal social charge and PRSI payment. There are no increases on excise and fuel, 23% VAT or 13.5% VAT rate. All of these measures are positive for the elderly. Yes, the bereavement grant is gone. In the case of where a spouse is left, or the civil partner or cohabitant receives 6 weeks of the payment after death. In addition to that, Deputy Daly, anybody who has genuine financial hardship in respect of a bereavement or a funeral can have assistance from the Department of Social Protection under the supplementary welfare support. Yes, it's there. And there are also a range of additional supports where this happens for people after a death, which are worth considerably more than the bereavement grant. For instance, the widows of surviving civil partners pension, which is a weekly pension based on contributions or a means test. Secondly, the widows of the surviving civil partner grant is a once-off payment of €6,000 where there is a dependent child up to 22 in full-time education. There are guardians payments where someone is looking after an orphan child, and if a person dies because of an accident at work or occupational disease, a special funeral grant of €850 is also paid. The level of living alone allowance is being maintained at €770 per week. There's the commitment from Minister Hogan and the Minister for Social Protection in respect of the Senior Alert Scheme. And as I said, the level of coverage between full and GP card for everybody over 70, even after the changes are implemented, will be 93%. The announcement of an additional €200 million in the budget in new capital projects includes 5,700 grants for adaptation of houses for the elderly and for the disabled. And finally, as you're aware, the DIRT measures do not affect married couples aged 65 and over with incomes below 36,000, or single people aged over 65 with incomes below €18,000. These are measures that have been introduced and maintained and protected for our elderly people, and so your charge of all these items being stripped away is invalid. Clearly, in respect of your comment on Dublin Bus, the issue here is one that I hope that the workers will accept. Despite the introduction of a number of cost reduction measures, Dublin Bus has lost €84 million over the last 5 years. This level of loss, Deputy Daly, is unsustainable. The Labour Court recommendations on to achieve the savings have been accepted by the non-driver grades in the company, but rejected on 3 separate occasions by the drivers, as you're aware. The government, ICTU and IBEC, have together made one final attempt to resolve this and engaged industrial relations personnel who went into the company to examine in great detail the issues which led to the rejections and to analyse those. Those people have now published a set of proposals for operational change which will address the concerns of the drivers while enabling the Labour Court recommendations to be implemented. And I would hope that these could be accepted now. I understand that the drivers are balloting on the proposals later this week, and I do hope that a positive outcome will result from that, Deputy Daly. It's in the interests of drivers, of the company, and of citizens at large.
Clare Daly, supplementary question.
I'm beginning to wonder, was the purpose of that to put us in some sort of hypnotic trance where you just mumble back the same nonsense that we've been hearing here for weeks and don't address any of the issues raised? And when you cut through the waffle, what you were actually saying is that the citizens who built this country over decades of work, who are outside this gates in the rain, are obviously missing something, that they're obviously deranged, that they don't understand the wonderful paradise on earth that your government has created for them. Well, do you know what? You're the one who's actually out of touch, and they're the ones whose feet are on the ground. If on paper a pensioner's income in Ireland is more than it is in other European countries, that's because the purchasing power that they have and the lack of social services that they have to access with that money is considerably worse than anywhere else in Europe. These people don't deserve to be bled dry. You talk about them being given favourable treatment. The reality, Taoiseach, is the only favourable treatment that's been meted out by your government is to the wealthy in our society. The top 10% of earners now share the same as the bottom 10%. You talk about us not being able to afford public services. The reality is that we have cut public spending by about 40% since 2008. And what is at the heart of this is a sea change in social policy. Can you not admit that your government is wedded to the ideas of neoliberalism, that your strategy is to strip public services, to facilitate privatisation and to facilitate a race to the bottom? Now, I know why you're out of touch. I can understand it, because your friends in the likes of independent news and media, who did get a big subsidy and bailout from this state of about 60 million, clap you on the back and tell you you're doing a great job. Dublin Bus is a vital public service. It's not supposed to break even. It should be subsidised, because we have the lowest form of public transport subsidy of any European country. And I would like you to say, why should Dublin Bus workers who have a modest wage forfeit that in order to facilitate a process whereby every year €50 million is given out for the Westlink toll bridge, which a project that was paid for twice over.
Thank you, Deputy.
Millions are given out every year in public-private partnerships for roads that aren't being used, yet buses which are can't get an adequate level of subsidy. It's upside down economics, and I think it does demonstrate that how out of touch you are.